Well, good morning everybody. On behalf of the Deputy Provost and myself, can I give you a very warm welcome to this full Council meeting. First of all, could I ask to ensure that mobile phones are switched off, please? That's fine. Thank you, sir. Thank you. Now, as we know, this is Wednesday. The fire alarm goes off on a Thursday. So if the fire alarm does go off, then you make your way to that exit over there. Thank you very much. Ask Mr Moody to take the sederant. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Provost. Provost Buchanan.
Present.
Deputy Provost Ritchie.
Present.
Councillor Aitchison. Councillor Alexander.
Present.
Councillor Balfour.
Present.
Councillor Binney. Present. Councillor Bissett. Councillor Black. Councillor Blackwood. Councillor Bowes. Councillor Coleman. Councillor Colley. Councillor Coombs. Councillor Flynn. Councillor Garner. Councillor Goldie. Councillor Grant. Councillor Harris. Councillor Hughes. Councillor Kerr. Councillor McHugh. Councillor McCluckie. Councillor Meiklejohn. Councillor Monroe. Councillor Murtagh. Councillor Nicholl. Councillor Nimmo. Councillor Patrick. Councillor Reid. And Councillor Spears.
That takes us to a declaration of interest, and for clarity I'll read out. Members should declare any financial and non-financial interest they have in any item of business at the meeting, identifying the relevant agenda item and the nature of the interest. At this time, have we got any declarations? No? None? Okay,
Thank you, Provost. Just a bit of clarity, Provost. I asked a couple of questions at the last meeting. They're not in the minutes. When a question is asked, because I asked for a report back in a year's time, is that myself that needs to bring it up again, or will that automatically come up in a year's time?
Provost, if you could just give us a moment to check the particular item that was raised, and that will give some context to the answer.
One of the items was also on page 35, para 5.24. I asked for a report on Summerford House. Never received it as well.
the business on. Councillor Kerr, we'll come back to you on that one, officers. Okay, thank you. Any other questions arising from the minute of the meeting of Falkirk Council held on the 6th of March? None? Okay, thank you. That takes us to item 3B, volume of minutes. Volume 4, 2018-19. Any questions arising from the minute? None? Mr Aitchison?
Hi, Provost. Morning. It's volume of minutes. It's on page 247 of agenda item number 6 on public protection. In light of the recognition at a Scottish Government level that drug deaths have reached emergency levels, when will the review of our alcohol and drug partnership be complete, and how serious does the community planning partnership take this?
Okay.
Sorry, I'm not sure that the mic was working with the question. I picked up a little of the question, but if it's possible to repeat the question. Yeah.
In light of the recognition at a Scottish Government level that drug deaths have reached emergency levels, when will the review of our alcohol and drug partnership be complete, and how serious does the Community Planning Partnership take this? Okay.
Well, so in terms of the specifics of when a specific review of the alcohol and drug partnership is complete, then I don't just now have the detail of that programme, but in terms of so we can get that and provide that information about the actual date of completion of review. But on the question of how seriously we are dealing with this question of the really concerning increase in drug deaths, we towards the end of the last calendar year we established a task force, task group on this question for us to try to help to understand what are the issues for us here in Falkirk around the spike in drug-related deaths, because in the current year these numbers are really up. There had been fluctuation over previous years, and but obviously with fluctuation there were some years when it was going back down. We could take some comfort that these figures appeared to be going back down, but then have gone back up and now are higher than they have ever been. So what the task group have been doing have been to try to establish as much information as we can and ensure sharing of information around what are we able to understand what are the factors over which we may have some control, what are the factors which we need to know about but we may not be able to have control over, and so there's the participants in that task group are health, social work, police, as you would expect, and we're also talking to our housing colleagues, so and third sector. So there's a kind of, we're really looking across the whole spectrum, and some of the factors are we believe are to do with changes in patterns of how people are accessing drugs and the actual nature of what they're accessing. So there's some suggestion that people are purchasing drugs in new ways, internet, for example, which means that people are combining substances which are perhaps different to what they've already had. So combinations of that. There's also one of the factors that's around is that with some of the drug deaths, although toxicology results take some time to come through, but I think one of the patterns that's emerging is that, at least with some, that there's a combination with prescribed medication and drugs which have been obtained illegally, which are actually interacting with each other, leading to some of these deaths. So some of these are factors which obviously the police are working incredibly hard on in terms of actually how do you control supply, and then but there are factors which are difficult to actually have control over. The things that we can control are have our staff at the front line, have they got the information they need to be working effectively, and we've looked to improve on that. We can always improve communication across agencies, and that's been part of our focus, is to actually ensure that where different parts of the system are picking up information, we're improving on how that information is communicated across the system, so that different people working in different agencies are actually connecting to all of the information that we have, which is intended to deliver prevention and reduction with these deaths.
Just very briefly, and the Chief Executive I may end up saying the same thing, just to say the Community Planning Partnership is taking this very seriously, and they are acting as a coordinating body to bring together all the agencies in order to do the deep dive to understand the causation and indeed create the action plan. There is a single item agenda coming to the next community planning partnership, specifically on drugs and alcohol, and that will help us to determine the collaborative way forward as a community planning partnership in order to actually seek to address the ongoing effects, because we've recognised that that is a significant spike in Falkirk area. Although we're not alone, there are other local authorities that are suffering similarly, and unfortunately that's just the nature of society at this moment in time. But we recognise that as a council we have a role, but it has to be a multi-agency approach, and our partners are committed to taking that forward.
Thank you, Provost. It was exactly that point, because of the level of concern, particularly in relation to the rising number of drug deaths. The Community Planning Partnership is going to have a specific session on that alone in June in order to try and move things forward.
Provost, could I be allowed just to ask Mr McAloon and other officers here? We know it is an increasing problem. We know that it's a desperate situation, not just in Scotland, although Scotland appears to be the worst at the minute. But what are we doing in the areas where you're actually seeing it from the portals that you do? There are areas where it has manifestly increased. I mean, there are areas in the council which are worse than others, obviously. There are situations in some places where I know where it's like the ice cream van coming in. There are people openly running businesses, and I could tell you the times and the hours when these people will be distributing drugs. But there doesn't seem to be any protection for the community for that. And no doubt the partnership will be aware of that and will be working for it. But what I would ask is that where the problem has manifestly worsened, that we put support in there, not only for the users of the drugs, because they have got the real problem, but for the communities that have to live round about them.
Michael, would you like to come back on that point?
Well, when we are aware of information of that kind, all of that information is shared across all of the different agencies. I guess some of the intervention won't be very visible on the ground in terms of police kind of monitoring and trying to actually get a way to actually get in and tackle some of these things where they're actually arising. I think this does also connect to the wider development of locality-based approaches to how we actually address challenges of this nature, and as we develop our more integrated structures, and which we'll kind of probably talk about later on, there will be a stronger framework within localities to ensure that hotspots are actually really clearly identified and identified quickly, and that anything that can be done to tackle this issue is done.
It is, Provost, and I know that it's of great concern to all members of the panel for the community safety aspects of the whole process. One of the agencies, obviously, with the greatest responsibility is Police Scotland, and I'm delighted that there's now, it seems to be, we've got over the hurdle, if you like, of the fear factor in many cases where individuals have come forward with information that's helped Police Scotland, and there's been a number of arrests in my ward locally in the recent past that's come about through active participation by the community. And I would urge all community individuals all individuals both within the community and out with, if they have information, to share that with Police Scotland. And I assume that Councillor Goldie has shared the information that he clearly has with Police Scotland.
Thanks, Provost. I would echo what I think what all are saying in terms of the seriousness, and how I'm sure everyone shares this concern across all parts of the chamber. I would like to stress and echo what Mr McElholm is saying, that this is a very complex issue in terms of what is being highlighted in the reports that have come up in terms of the drug death. It's not simply an increase in terms of the numbers. The combinations of factors here are very different from the kinds of patterns of what we've seen before, and the multi-agency approach is crucial to that. But I just want to highlight, obviously, the seriousness that we're all taking this with, and certainly from my point of view as public protection portfolio holder, to ask our officers in that coordination of evidence gathering and reporting, that we need to make sure that although we understand the issues and the concerns that our communities are having, that not so much knee-jerk reactions, but taking action without the real understanding of the evidence and the contributory factors which have changed, can make a situation worse. And it's good to see that we are progressing these issues and taking them very seriously and looking at that. But that we do have to make sure that we understand and use all the evidence from all our agencies working together to come up with a strategy, and as has been mentioned, that there's the focus on that coming forward in June. So it's something which I'll continue to be taking very seriously and progressing also and keeping on top of. But I think that emphasis on evidence base and the changing nature of things is important to stress.
Is it the same opinion as yourself that we're all seriously concerned and we're all striving for the same end? Would you like to say anything further?
It's good to hear that everybody's taking it serious, but things are moving on. Things aren't going to get any better, unfortunately. And yeah, we have multidisciplinary teams going to meet and things like that, but surely we could have some interim measures put in place.
3C, Information Bulletin, Volume 4, 2018 to 19. Any questions in relation to the volume of minutes? Can we agree that? No. Councillor Kerr, could you tell us the page, sir?
I have a few questions,
right.
Provost.
If you could read the page out first for everybody, then we can get to it right away. Thank you.
For clarification, page 5. Page 5, the loft insulation being supplied by Everwarm for Bathgate, is this fully funded by the Scottish Government?
Thanks, Provost. I need to go back to Councillor Kerr in relation to that, but I'm happy to do that outside of the meeting.
Okay. Second point, still on page 5, Provost, about the collection of non-ferrous metals. We're paying a company £49,500 to come and take metal away for us. Should we not be getting money for them taking the money, or taking the metal?
My apologies to Councillor Kerr and other members. This amount is actually an income amount. We haven't made that clear in the bulletin. That's the money that we receive from disposing of these cans.
That's great. Great. Next one is page 19, Provost. On the initiative at Falkirk Stadium with the carbon vehicle hub. 26 new spaces at a cost of £1 million. I'd just like to know how many cars use it and what are the savings for the council.
This is obviously a project that's been funded externally, and as you say, it's an excellent project. It's not in place yet, so we don't know how effective it has been, but we're confident that it will be well used, particularly because of its location and its proximity to the motorway.
Okay. Yeah, page 21, Provost. School bus contracts. Some of them saying that there's not been awarded. Why are they not awarded, and when will we get notification of them being awarded?
Yes, I don't have the detail on each of those. Quite often we don't award contracts because we haven't had sufficient returns, or the returns are inadequate and we'll go back out to tender again. But I'll get the detail around the specific contracts for councillor care, and obviously an update when they are finally awarded.
A couple more, Provost. If we can go back, 16. On garden aid, spending over £2 million on garden aid. I just want to know, when we set these up, is it still the same tenants that are in the houses, or are we cutting grass and hedges, whatever, to people that shouldn't be getting it? Is there a survey done every year, or is there a...
So on garden aid, I don't recognise the figure of 2 million, but so I think it's probably closer to just below 500,000 is my kind of figure that I would be working with for garden aid. And then on the question of who actually receives that service, so that there is currently an eligibility criteria around that. So new applicants into the service are there is an eligibility criteria which is that the person is in receipt of a social care service. So, and then people who were who were using the service before the implementation of that criteria, which was around 3 years ago, have remained in the service because that was a transitional arrangement that was put in place, if they have wanted to. And then a number of people have probably, well, I know that a number of people have actually, over that period of time have ceased to use it. So the specific figures, I'm sorry, I don't have those figures directly here available, but again, we could provide those.
At the same report, Mr Marconi, 2,124,000.
Sorry, so this is
in the report, page 16.
Yeah. Yeah. Sorry.
Just hold on a second.
Perhaps I could help. Yeah, perhaps I could help.
So.
Provost, the figure of £2 million refers to it's a multi-year contract, and underneath that it indicates what the annual value is. So the £2 million refers to the total value of the contract over the life of the contract.
Yeah. Last one for the moment, Provost. On page 38 and 39, back my point, I still never got clarification if people who were on the garden aid, who have maybe passed away, moved to the house that they're in, are we still servicing them?
I think members have brought this up before. If people pass away, is there a cheque Is it yourself, Mr Ritchie? Is there a check done periodically to ensure that it's the same residents in the property?
Thanks, Provost. When there's a change in tenancy, there should be a change in the garden aid contract arrangements.
Last question, 38 and 39. The refurbishment of the toilets in St Margaret's, Wollerstone and Bowhouse Primaries at a cost of £40,000, £36,000 respectively. £127,000 for the kids' toilets. Is this value for money for us? Seems a lot of money for the kids' toilets.
Thank you, Provost. Obviously, these works are significant works, and they're only there are jobbing repairs that are done to schools, including toilets, from time to time. But these are very significant refurbishment works that have been undertaken in these three particular schools. The tender process that we pursue, obviously, is very robust. We use previously awarded contracts as benchmarking, so we're confident that these are good value contracts. I can certainly get Councillor Kerr more details in relation to the extent of the works, if that would be helpful to him.
Okay, thank you very much. Councillor Reid next. Thank you.
Thank you, Provost. My first question is on page 4 in the hard copy, which I think is page 6 on the iPad, and it's the second top item, the Workers' Memorial Project. And as a member of the Society for the Protection of the Apostrophe, I take it that's more than worker, and the apostrophe should be after the S and not before it. But in a more serious matter, I see once again that this project has hit the bumpers. I recall being approached by Mr McCallum of the local TUC about 8 years ago, and it seems to be the same problem presenting itself again. That is the lack of investigation into the underworks required. Could someone tell us when this project will start and, more importantly, finish?
Thank you, Provost. I don't have that detail, but I'll certainly get it for Councillor Reid.
Provost. Having attended the recent memorial, Councillor Binney and myself, we understand that there's been a problem with the supply of the stone, that all the works were ready to go, and unfortunately the suppliers let them down because they had hoped to have the work completed for this year's commemoration. They do, however, hope that it will be finished before the end of the year.
Yes, I understand there were several members from all groups there, Provost. An item further down is the supply of dog waste disposal bags. It's a very pleasant time of year with blossom on the trees, but unfortunately there's another blossom starting to appear either in the form of green dog bags or black dog bags. There are hundreds out there, hundreds just thrown away. Will we start a campaign to prevent this misuse of the dog waste bags? It's a big problem, and if we look at our responses from constituents, it's very high up on the list.
Thank you, Provost. Yes, this is an issue that's often raised with myself and colleagues as well. And we have recently appointed a new coordinator in the waste strategy team who will be looking particularly around litter, and this is one of the things that's fairly high up our list. So we'll be hoping to do something about that relatively soon.
If I may suggest, on the routes of the poplar walks along the canals, for example, there's an obvious lack of dog disposal bins. There are general bins, but I can only think of 2 dog disposal bins. Maybe something that needs expanded, I think, quite a bit. The next question is page 19. Thank you. check if that's it. Yeah, it's back to the Falkirk Stadium low carbon vehicle hub. I notice that contribution comes from the TIF infrastructure budget. I just wondered how that particular item tied into that, into the TIF. The TIF I understood was to, one, improve the infrastructure, secondly, to produce income for the council by business rates. I just wondered if this particular item tied into that, to these aspirations.
Thank you, Provost. Yes, it does. Obviously, you're quite correct that the investment from the TIF project is all in infrastructure, including low-carbon promotion infrastructure. There is a steering group which governs the expenditure in respect of all TIF projects, that includes Scottish Futures Trust and Scottish Government, so it was signed off by that steering board. It was felt that this would promote use of the area and people potential for investment. If this facility were there, then potential investors would find it attractive to invest in the area, particularly since it's so close to the Gateway development that has recently been reported to members.
Just a further question on the TIF. The piece of what at the moment is spare ground between the stadium and basically the main road. When does that feature in the plans? That's a bit between Earls Gate roundabout and the stadium.
Yes.
The stuff to the north of the stadium.
Yes.
When does that phase commence?
We're currently working on a phase at Junction 5, and that's the phase that will come along later on. We've obviously done some work at Junction 6 further down at the roundabout, and the part between Earlsgate roundabout and the Fantasy Island roundabout is a project that we're working up to in detail, particularly relating to the crossing and the pedestrian crossing, which the designs are looking very impressive for that. So we'll be bringing that back to members in short order, with a view to us starting work on that. That project was approved by the board I've mentioned, the steering board, at its last meeting, so that will be coming back to members.
Just to thank officers for the responses. Provost.
Thank you, Provost. I'd just like to go back to Councillor Kerr's question on the garden aid. The answer we got, I don't think was actually an answer. Mr Ritchie came up with the best one was where we review if there's a change of tenancy. But I don't think that was the question that was getting asked. I think the question was asked, do we review it? It doesn't always have to be a change of tenancy. It could be a change of work circumstances, their people's health issues. Are they still entitled to garden aid? Are they back at work? Are they still on benefits that might not be entitled to garden aid? I feel that was the question that was asked, not about a change of tenancy.
The equation there in relation to the statement by Councillor Grant.
Thank you. Provost, just to expand on what I said, if there's a change of circumstance, then the change should be made to the garden aid contract list. So if somebody goes on to benefits and meets the eligibility criteria, then they would go on to the garden aid contract, and similarly if somebody went the other way, then they would come off the garden aid contract. Obviously that tends not to happen in too many instances.
So do they need to notify us if there's a change in circumstances? Do we rely on the tenant notifying us?
That's usually the way in which the changes are made, yeah.
Councillor Nicholl.
Thank you, Provost. Could I also refer to page 38 on an item that was raised earlier by my good friend, the member for Upper Braes, and it's in regard to St Margaret's School. Myself and the Parent Council have for over 2 years campaigned for better toilet facilities at St Margaret's. I regard this as excellent value for money to bring the toilets up to a reasonable standard, and I would just advise that this is only for phase 1 of the toilets. Such as the dire need for improved toilets at St Margaret's School, that the £40,000 that we're passing here today will, as I say, only be for phase one. There is much work still to be done.
Okay then. Any other questions in relation to the information bulletin? Can we agree? Agreed, thank you. Mr Moody wants to come back in relation to an earlier question by Councillor Kerr. Thank you, Mr Moody.
Yes, thank you, Provost, and apologies to Councillor Kerr for not having the answer immediately to hand, but I think it was worth just going back and checking through the record there. Firstly, the point of general principle is that the minutes are primarily there to record the decisions of Council. They're not there to record each and every question that's asked during the course of a discussion. But we do separately have an action sheet which follows on from the Council, which will record actions by Chief Officers which are necessary to follow up, for instance, on questions which are raised. And just checking through the action sheet, we do have an action that the Chief Officer of the Health and Social Care Partnership will include information in the future update report on a specific point raised by Councillor Kerr. Now, it's not actually the one in relation to Summerford, so we will actually go back and check the recording to see how that can be taken forward. But there was another point which I recall raised by Councillor Kerr that is fully recorded and which will come back in the update report from the Chief Officer. Okay, thank you very much. Just the questions. Item 4. Any questions? No questions, thank you. 5. Role and action log, pages 15 to 17 on your agenda. Mr Moody, any questions relating to that? Thank you. Provost, I think this is simply for noting and information for members, and as far as I can see, all the relevant information is provided in the action sheet. So there may be questions from members, though, and I see Councillor Nimmo has his light on.
Okay, Councillor Nimmo, thank you.
Thanks very much, Provost. I've just got a question in relation to the equal pay item on the log. It's the first item on page 16. The last update was back on the 5th of December. We're 5 months or so on, and I'm just wondering how many cases are still waiting to be settled.
Thank you, Provost. There are a small number of cases outstanding with no win, no fee lawyers. These are small number of cases in terms of what we've dealt with overall. So all the union cases have been dealt with, and the vast majority of the no win, no fee lawyers have been dealt with. We're currently in dialogue with the relevant legal firm over individual cases and just checking the circumstances associated with them.
Thanks for that answer, Stuart. Can you maybe put a figure to it? I know you said it was just a small number, but could you give us even an estimate as to how many are outstanding?
Not off the top of my head, but I can come back to you I'll come back to you on that.
That takes us now to item 6, a referral from Executive, 16th April 2019, Treasury Management Strategy 2019 to 20, and the report is pages 18 to 39 on your agenda, and reported by Mr Smale. Mr Smale, would you like to come forward, sir? Thank you.
Thank you, Provost, and good morning. The report is forwarded to Council for consideration, consistent with the SIPFA Treasury Management Code. The report sets out the strategy for the current financial year for both borrowing and investment. The report was considered by the Executive and agreed for forwarding to Council for consideration. I won't go into the actual details of the report, Provost, with your agreement, but happy to address any points of clarification or any questions that the meeting may have this morning.
Okay, thank you. Any questions arising for the report? Councillor Meikle-John, thank you.
Thank you, Provost. As has been said, this came from the Executive. There was a good discussion at the Executive around a number of areas. within the report, and the exploration of the potential changes around the loan fund repayments, which could assist, particularly with supporting our revenue budget going forward. I'm happy to move the report.
Formally second and reserve the right to come back in.
Yes, Provost, on 4.2.9, at the Executive, Mr Smale to the possibility of the Council getting a further discount from the PWLB, and that he would report back to members in due course. I wondered if such a report was forward or whether negotiations were still taking place.
The dialogue with the PWLB is still ongoing in terms of supplying the relevant information, but I don't anticipate any difficulty. I think it's more a formality.
Yeah. Okay, thanks for that. 4.7.5. It appears that war has again broken out between accountants, and the Directors of Finance in Scotland are in a different position from that of the Audit Scotland. Do we know what the result of the battle will be and the consequences thereof?
The consequences are significant, and therefore the reason for fighting the battle in the first place. It boils down to different interpretations of the underlying regulations and guidance flowing from those regulations. And as things sat, there was effectively an impasse between the two, with legal opinions on both sides. So clearly a somewhat difficult position unless it went to a higher and more formal legal decision-making forum. Anyway, to assist and resolve this impasse, the Cabinet Secretary, Mr Mackay, very helpfully in his settlement letter of late January, covering a range of settlement issues, did also pick up on this point and undertook to issue necessary regulations early in the current financial year to resolve the difference. So on that basis, and once that change is made, the matter will be resolved. Effectively, in a nutshell, there are significant Treasury activities that are allowed post-2016. The issue was whether you were entitled to undertake the same transactions relating to prior to 2016 and thereby have the ability to harvest further savings. So the savings post-2016 were secure. It was just the interpretation allowed those same savings prior to 2016 to be forthcoming. And as the Leader has already mentioned, there are significant savings secured on the back of those transactions that are captured in the business plan that was considered recently by Executive.
So Mr Mackay has stepped in like a boxing referee and told you to break in the meantime. 4.7.7 says that all assets, of course, independently valued in a 5-year rolling programme. What's the value of these premises in which we reside at the moment?
The municipal buildings?
Yes.
I'm sure our colleagues in development services might say they have a negative value, and they're probably right, given the degree of works that are evidently required to secure any value for the building. But I would defer to my colleagues there. In terms of the Council's overall portfolio of assets, which amounts to, from memory, close on £3 billion for insurance purposes, the value of this building would be pretty insignificant in that context. But obviously that fits into the context of the consideration of the new headquarters and will be an integral component of that evaluation.
On that particular point, given the capital money is put aside for the new headquarters and that centre, what will be the total repayment over the period of such loans?
A previous report set that out. We'll need to get the specific figures for you, but there was a profile shown reflecting the staged capital outlay. So in the early years of presumed start to the project, the capital costs were relatively insignificant, but once we got up to the full capital outlay, thereafter the annual costs were very significant, and I think we're talking something in the order of £1 million or so per annum. But I will refer back to you with a specific figure immediately after the meeting.
Okay, thank you. Provost.
Are we any other questions? We've got a motion moved and seconded. Are we agreed? That takes us to item 7. It's the Falkirk Health and Social Care Partnership Strategic Plan 2019-2022, and the report is by Mr McElholm, Chief Officer. Thank you very much. Mr McElholm, could you maybe come forward, sir?
Okay.
It's a lot easier for people to see and hear you at the same time. Thank you.
Well, as well as Mr McElholm's coming forward, if you don't mind, we see a circus here, officers being asked to walk back and forward. Surely to God, whoever organised the new system could have got a system that works for this side. Can we maybe have a couple of quid passed away here, whip round and we'll get better mics?
Provost, if I can clarify, the system does work from the side, but it's the Provost preference that officers come forward to either the top table or to the side.
If we had that clarified, I'm suitably chastised, Mr Moody.
Okay, thank you. In presenting this report, I am deputising for Patricia Cassidy, the Chief Officer, who is on holiday. So the report brings to Council the strategic plan for the Health and Social Care Partnership. This plan, we've come to the end of the 16-19 plan, required to bring forward the 19-22 plan. And you see it on page 41, 1.2, the IGB, the Integrated Joint Board, asks that the report be presented to the Council along with other partners in order to raise awareness and ensure that people are fully sighted on the direction that the partnership are moving in. The background is that the legislation, the Public Bodies Joint Work in Scotland Act, requires Integrated Joint Board to produce a strategic plan, strategic commissioning plan, and it also requires that be reviewed and taken and then changed as necessary. At page 42, there's an account of the process that we went through to review the plan and to bring forward the current document. So throughout the calendar year of last year, we had a number of consultation meetings which primarily focused on bringing together the membership of the IGB and the membership of the Strategic Planning Group. So the Strategic Planning Group is also established in statute, and it brings together a range of people from the third sector as well as some elected members, and its purpose is to act as a check and balance and to be involved in supporting the IGB with bringing forward this plan. So at 4.6 you can see that the the strategic outcomes that have been established for the continuation of the plan are actually broadly in continuity with the outcomes that we had identified for the first period of planning for the IGB from its inception in 2016. So those outcomes are set out at 4.6 around self-management. And again, members will be very familiar from with that concept from the changes that we have made in, for example, how we deliver home support, home care. So much greater emphasis on reablement, supporting people to be as independent as they can be in order to make actually better outcomes for individual people, because that independence supports their well-being, supports their health, but also delivers better, more effective use of the resource. And in that way, you can see that a lot of all of these outcomes really are in a line from the Christie Commission proposals from some years ago. There's a consistency around working better with people, in partnership with people, but also making the best use of resource and also working across agencies. And then the next outcome there is around safe. And again, members will be very familiar with the adult support and protection agenda and ensuring that we do deliver services which keep people safe and keep people well for longer. The third outcome is around experience. So we're very keen, determined that we actually listen to what are people's own experiences of using services and of being supported, and indeed of moving beyond using services, taking up options under self-directed support, which are non-traditional, which are not necessarily service-based. And then the final outcome is around strong and sustainable communities, and there is a strong commitment within the work that we're doing in the IGB to really focus on how do we work with communities, and we've already touched on that in discussion this morning in other areas, that we know that the need in different parts of the Falkirk area it does differ, and we are committed to improving how we actually identify need at a local level and then actually tailor interventions to ensure that we are actually tackling the need and targeting resource in the most effective way. At page 44, you see the strategic needs assessment, and I guess the overall message from that work that we did last year reviewing the strategic needs assessment was that broadly the needs which we are identifying remain those that had been identified in 2016. There's clearly some change which we anticipated at that time, known change around the demographics, the ageing of the population, the related increase in prevalence of long-term conditions. So those factors are significant factors in our forward projection of needs assessment. And we obviously also identified there are emerging issues, so we've talked about one of those already, around the specific example of an emerging issue around the crisis around increases in drug-related deaths. So the strategic needs assessment, as we go through the next 3 years, it takes cognizance of those changes and emerging issues. Page 45, we also note the consultation that was then done with the wider public. So the process of creating this plan we sought to involve as many third sector bodies and individuals as we possibly could. And you can see at paragraph 4.16 that we have 98 responses, and a significant number of those came from organisations. So that we can take some confidence that this plan does actually reflect the wider views of our communities here in Falkirk. Those are the kind of main. As we go through, you can see there's reference to our work with housing colleagues and work on workforce planning as some of the underpinnings of how we're going to deliver the plan. And then the report then leads really into the presentation of the document itself. And it's a lengthy document. I think the only point that I would want to highlight within it is at page 55. There's the reference to the work we're doing on locality plans, and so the creation of West, Central, East localities as our main focus. So we're very pleased to be able to report at the present time that having reached a conclusion to protracted negotiations between the partners, that we are now establishing an integrated locality-based structure. So currently we're at recruitment stage for integrated locality managers, 3 of those posts across those 3 localities. So that will set the framework for the work that will be done over the coming 3 years on the delivery of the plan. And I'm happy then to take any kind of questions or comments as we go through.
Thank you. I don't intend to say a great deal about the report. I think it's very good, and I want to thank everyone who's been involved in its development. There's been a great deal of work to develop this strategic plan across the partnership with partners and, most importantly, with stakeholders. It sets out how we will plan and commission services to deliver our priorities over this 3-year period, utilising what is an integrated budget. It remains underpinned by the key national outcomes that Joe outlined, but we must use our joint resources as effectively as possible to deliver and meet the growing demand. And I think I've spoken more than once about the growing demand for support, but most importantly to deliver the best outcomes for our citizens. The plan encourages greater self-management, choice and control to individuals and their families, and Joe had mentioned self-directed support, and that is a really critical part of enabling people to have choice and control over the support that they receive, so that they can have the most positive experience with high-quality services delivered by ours and other skilled and supported workforce. I've said it before, and I think I say it again. Our workforce, both in social care and in health, are one of our greatest assets, and they've done a great deal of work with Joe and his team in terms of the development of home care, a lot of work at Summerford, which was mentioned as well, really about improving the services and support and the experience of people who receive services. The priorities, and I think the priorities are outlined there within the report. It's quite a lengthy document, but I would encourage everyone to really get into it, because it's got a lot of really good information. Support for carers, I think most people know that's something I've got quite a keen interest in, but it's a key part of enabling people to live at home and more independently. The focus on prevention and early intervention and in harm reduction. It's vital that we take early opportunities to help people improve their mental health and well-being, but also to help people address issues with drugs or alcohol. And I think we're all very concerned around the number of drug deaths in this area, but we also need to get to the early points and prevent people becoming addicted to substances in the first place, and getting help in as soon as possible when they're having problems. But finally, we know the impact of health inequalities. They're well evidenced, reducing life expectancy and increased likelihood of long-term conditions and more. Reducing the impact of these inequalities is something for all of us. It's across all the partners, and reducing poverty is going to be a really big part of that, so that the integrated joint board does not sit on its own as part of the community planning partnership, but also part of delivering the Falkirk Council poverty strategy, so that we can actually make a difference, particularly to those who are experiencing significant levels of poverty. At the moment, the development of locality teams, which Joe mentioned, will help deliver the right services and support in the right areas, transforming what we can offer and making inroads in improving care and health and well-being. So there's a lot in the strategic plan, but I think it's an excellent document, and it will help us deliver the best outcomes for the people in Falkirk.
Thank you for your input. Councillor Munro.
Thank you, Provost. This is a very full report, but I feel in some ways that does this strategic plan include enough on the prevention of illness? We're dealing with the point at which people are elderly and infirm, and I don't see in here sufficient perhaps on how we work to improve people's health and well-being before they get to this point. And it would have been nice if we'd seen some measures working with the trust or other bodies to encourage people to walk. You know, a daily walk helps mental well-being, it helps people's circulation and fitness, it aids sleep. And I don't think there's enough in this document about joining up to at the front end to deal with things before they become serious issues. And I wondered, you know, is there something that maybe isn't in this document that covers those aspects that clearly are important for the future?
Yeah, I agree fully with the sentiment expressed, which is around prevention and early intervention. The document does or can be read alongside there is an overarching health improvement plan for the same period, which the publication of that has been led by NHS Forth Valley, but based on a similar consultation with the various stakeholders. So it isn't an area that's at all neglected, far from it. And we do envisage over the lifetime of this plan an ever deepening kind of relationship with the community trust. So I think there's no argument at all from any of the partners about the importance of that, and we are meeting regularly with the community trust around how we support their work, which in turn actually supports prevention and provides long-term solutions. So examples of that are, as you say, around kind of promotion of walking, and but we also see opportunities that some work that's currently perhaps carried out through allied health professionals, kind of leading, for example, post-stroke rehabilitation classes. Some of that work could, in fact, be taken forward by the community trust, and that is still actually prevention, because by actually establishing the connection for the person following an initial stroke, establishing the connection with rehabilitation and the community trust, and going to their local gym, that they will actually sustain that involvement beyond what would have happened from attendance at a session of physiotherapy. I beg your pardon. So.
Yes, thank you, Provost. One of the things, section 4.12, the things that jumps out at me, all these words are wonderful, but what it lacks is some detail, some facts and figures. And personally, as some of you will know, I've had some health issues. And one of the ways to help people live longer is to give them easy and instant access to get a diagnosis of a serious condition. Without revealing any personal details, it took 18 months before I got a triple heart bypass in December. Now, in this section, it mentions that there's an anticipated shortfall of newly qualified GPs. I would like to know what that shortfall is. And the second part of that same point is, what is the current shortfall of GPs within Falkirk District? How many GP practices are managed by the NHS where the GPs in the practice have decided they've had enough? And the final point is that it says that GPs often retire early, but has anybody asked the question why? These are people that are contractors, but why have they retired early, and what are we in the IGB doing about it? Because there is an issue here that needs to be addressed, because it must be frustrating to many people in this chamber and outside, more importantly, the difficulty in getting appointments, the difficulty in having these referrals to the NHS. So I would like some facts and figures, really, rather than fancy words. Thank you.
Is there an opportunity just now for these stats, or I'll let you respond to the general thoughts, Councillor Flynn, and then if you haven't got the information available in terms of statistics, then you can maybe furnish a report. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, it will be possible to provide information on the specific, workforce planning projections around GPs. The factors that underpin shortage of GPs are again complex. So, a lot of GPs are retiring early, as you've said, and factors around, well, we know some of those factors just anecdotally talking to GPs is about stress of the job, and it's a hard job, and there are other factors, pension changes recently, which in fact are a factor for some people when they actually leave because of some changes that happen in pension. So, but whatever those drivers are, we are looking at that. There's a primary care transformation programme which is actually led at a Scotland-wide level, but there's a local iteration of the primary care transformation programme, which we can have, the most recent kind of update from that reported. There have been some specific work done with particular practices particularly in the Grangemouth area, where we really hit this crisis early some years ago, and there's been a lot of quite innovative work done there around how alternative professional roles can actually deliver better outcomes for many of the interventions for which people go to a GP practice, freeing up the more limited GP resource to actually concentrate on those things which only a GP can do. So there is kind of work that's there and learning for us within Falkirk from some of that test of change with the Grangemouth practice.
Yeah, Provost, it's a very full response here for Mr McElhone. I just wondered, I couldn't quite pick up about the central hub. Was the central hub, is there any consideration being given to the central hub going in with the housing department, which you would think would be a sensible situation?
Sorry, I'm not sure that I was kind of answering on the point about central hub and housing, but I'm sorry, Dennis. Sorry, Councillor. Yeah.
I think what is seen as a central locality team, I think that's, and I don't think that's necessarily a building, and I think that's maybe where the confusion lies.
Yep. Well, thanks for that. But the real reason I asked the question was to try and find out what is happening with the central hub, which was to be based in the library. Can we get any update on when housing will be moving in to the library?
Thank you, Provost. We are in dialogue with colleagues in the Trust and colleagues in Development Services over looking at different drawings to make the most effective use of the space in the library and what the associated costs of that will be. We are looking at the latest iteration of these drawings and costs, and we should have something back in the next couple of weeks or so in terms of what the costs and the logistics would be of the next proposed set of arrangements.
Thank officers for that. It's just that sources close to the palace tell us that our original thoughts that one, the building wasn't suitable, two, it would be difficult to adapt, and three, it would be extremely costly and wasn't the right site. It may come forward, but that was the reason for asking the question. Thank you.
Thank you, Provost. I think this is a report in which we can all find a degree of agreement. I think it meets all of our reasons for becoming councillors in the first place to deal with these problems. But in 4.12, there's a rather alarming statement made there. Sorry, it's not 4. Yes, it is, sorry. 4.12, the third bullet point. In Falkirk, all case mortality has been increasing for the most deprived areas and declining for the least deprived areas. This shows that health inequalities in Falkirk not only exist, they are widening, which is a stark comment. So to illustrate, if you happen to live, let's take, with various reasons, let's take Langleys, let's take parts of Darcus Camlin, and compare it to Polmont. There's several years' difference in the mortality rate. And it is not only static, it's in fact widening. Having heard various answers this morning, all referring back to community planning, I think community planning has been an absolute disaster. There's been a lot of talk over, I don't know how long, when did community planning come in? 12 years ago, 10 years ago? But very actually, it seems to be quite a languid, almost turgid process, community planning, with very few results at the end of it. And I just wondered what community planning were doing about this particular item, which is a cause for considerable worry.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Mr. McElhone, will you maybe answer the first part of that question, Councillor Reid, in relation to the widening of the serious issues in Falkirk? Thank you.
Yeah. So within the Health and Social Care Partnership, there's a very we're strongly committed around how we approach this question, and again, the complexity around that, clearly health inequalities are linked to poverty, as has been mentioned earlier, the significance of poverty, and poverty is increasing. You know, that's also a given in terms of some of the wider changes that have happened economically over the period that Councillor Reid is referring to. There's been reference to community planning, but clearly, we have to take responsibility for I've referred already to the length of time it's taken us to get to the point in terms of integration of health and social care, to actually create these integrated localities with an integrated locality manager, whose job will be to lead on what are the inequalities in each of those three areas, and actually go out there and bat for what we think are the solutions that are within our control. Some things will not always be within our control, but I think there is a collective responsibility around this question of how long it has taken us to actually get the agreed integrated health and social care structures before we even look at any wider kind of responsibilities for this. So some examples of things that we are an example of something that we can do, that we're able to do, to actually look at this whole area around health inequality. We've currently gone through a recruitment process. We've funded 3 posts which will be held within the Community Learning and Development function, whose job is to support communities with capacity building and to actually identify with communities what is it that actually is important in their community around, for example, social exclusion or isolation, which these are factors which actually lead to early mortality. That's a known research risk. So, that's a small step in terms of actually creating those 3 posts. They'll work in each locality. But by actually being able to actually point to steps like that we've taken, then we're able to say, well, whilst we can't control the macroeconomic kind of structural factors that are leading to across the UK economy, leading to these widening of health inequalities, we are actually doing some things that we are able to do, and we're similarly about to move to implementation of a community link worker post, which will be managed by the third sector and based within GP practices. Not all GP practices at this point, but we will actually target that resource into those areas where we know health inequalities are greatest, and they will then complement that work that will be done by CLD around community capacity, and then a little bit further down the line, we will work with with the third sector to broaden out that reach in terms of social inclusion opportunities to identify those individuals who are most at risk in terms of their health, and actually look at how we can actually support them with activities within their communities which currently we're not reaching. So there is work that we are doing, and more work that we will do. But I am very firmly of the belief that the creation of those localities, in terms of structure, will actually help us to give additional momentum and energy into those areas around health inequalities.
Yes, I'd be very interested to hear about that. Yes.
Thank you, Provost. I note your comments about community planning. My view is that community planning can be a great force for good, because what it should be about is galvanising and organising the partners to work together to get stuff done, which is important to the communities that we all serve. And I think there are examples where community planning has achieved that. In terms of the specific point about the divergence in life expectancy in terms of different parts of our community, I think Joe is right that is something which the integration agenda should be addressing. What I would say from the community planning point of view is that on a regular basis, in fact, we're about to revisit the community planning priorities for the forthcoming number of years. And in doing that, I think we need to look at both the statistical evidence of what the major challenges are facing us, and also the evidence that's coming out of our communities in terms of their concerns, to determine what these priorities are, and also think about what the best way of dealing with these priorities is.
With respect to what galvanise is not one I would apply to community planning. It's probably the last verb or adjective I would apply. But we look to the Chief Executive to change that, hopefully. And I don't think poverty is the sole reason. Many of us here grew up in relative poverty. It was the aspiration of our parents that pulled us out of that. So it's a very difficult thing to tackle, very difficult indeed, and I acknowledge that fully. 4.19 is a reference to the involvement of housing's contribution. And there are various policies in which housing, of course, are heavily involved, closer to home and so on. However, Councillor Binney and I have been jointly involved in a long drawn-out debate, shall we say, with housing. In the case of the club rooms and the flats, you have the main one at Callender Park, you have one at Belmont, you have one at Bretton, you have one at Greenbank, one at Glenfure, various club rooms, one at Parkfoot. The Council is seeking to enter into a new lease with these people, despite the fact the Council built them specifically to cope with loneliness in these communities. What they're seeking to do is impose a peppercorn rent, a very low rent, and a grant of £300, but in exchange for that, the people concerned will have to pay for all the heating, the lighting, the water. There are meters already being installed. The result, Greenbank is closed, perhaps not for that reason, it is maybe coming. Belmont is on the verge of closing. Bretton and Cornton are up in arms about it. And for the life of me, I do not know why officers set off on this particular path. It seems to contradict all of our policies in connection with dealing with the elderly. Perhaps the answer might be that social work might want to make a contribution if housing aren't going to. But I think this has to be dealt with. In fact, Councillor Binney and I will be meeting tomorrow evening with the Belmont residents to discuss their particular problems And I just wondered if I could have some response as to why this exercise was undertaken in the first place, and secondly, what are the objectives, and furthermore, does it really coincide with the overall plans?
Thank you, Provost. The review of the arrangements for the use of common rooms goes back some time and was kicked off for a number of reasons, one of which was a lack of consistency in how common rooms were being used across the various tenants and residents associations. It was also an attempt to bring leases up to date because they hadn't been renewed for some considerable time, to reflect items such as the need to regulate the use of electrical equipment within common rooms, the use of, or the need for food hygiene within common rooms, the need for better management of events being held within common rooms, the issue of commercialisation of common rooms. As Councillor Reid says, there is a nominal rent charged to the Residents and Tenants Association, £5 per annum. For those registered tenants associations, there is a grant of £300 provided from housing. Again, as Councillor Reid said, we are at various stages in having leases signed up. So some leases are signed up, some we're hoping to get signed up this week and the following week. There is one registered tenants association which is folded, but not for the reasons of the introduction of a new lease, and we're working with the tenants associations in the flats round about to see if we can get access for the tenants in that particular tower to the common rooms elsewhere. It's allowed us to work with the tenants associations to establish, do they actually need the number of common rooms that are there, or could some be returned and turned into accommodation for letting. The common rooms are an important area for tenants to be able to gather to avoid isolation. We've got tenants associations which go beyond the high-rise flats. So I think what we're trying to do is ensure there is a commonality between what happens in the high-rise flats and what happens with those organisations who don't have their own common room and have to hire a property for their particular events that are held. This, as I said earlier, is a discussion that's being had for a number of years now. There's, I think, quite a lot of support and dialogue has gone in to the discussions in terms of the new lease, and there will be further discussions which will be required before we can get to the point where hopefully new leases can be signed off. Progress so far has been difficult, I think. There's been some challenging conversations in this, but I think as officers we are confident with the support that we can provide going forward that we can get to a satisfactory resolution on this matter.
I'm not sure how to answer that one. I still fail to understand why these common rooms were provided not at the request of the tenants, by the council for the use of the tenants and residents. The council supplied them, and it's the council who, of course, should lay down the conditions. I'm not arguing with that, but not to the disadvantage of the people who are living in isolation in the flats. The flats are different from any other community. You don't get a house there unless you're over the age of 60, for example. Some of the residents, many of the residents have been up there for 25, 30 years. They're in their late 80s and 90s. It's a different community completely from any other community in Falkirk. And I think they should be treated differently. And I'll come back to the question I asked. If housing won't cough up the money, will social work cough up the money?
An answer?
Probably not, but...
Obviously a difficult one.
Yeah, I mean, I think that that's a request. So, you know, we will look at any requests coming in. I know that some of, because I had some kind of notification of Councillor Reid's inquiry yesterday, so I have been able to ask whether, you know, what knowledge some of my staff had, which is, you know, some limited kind of conversations with colleagues in housing around the issue. So I think, you know, we can certainly take it away, but it's not something where I could give a decision of that kind, you know, right here. But those posts I referred to earlier around community learning development, you know, additional posts around community capacity, I think we would be interested to ensure that a connection is made at an early point between those new officers, because they have a role in supporting a whole range of partners and small organisations and small groups with developing capacity in a changing environment. So that's certainly something that we would look to tap to connect in to the issue that you're raising.
Thank Mr McConnell. It was a piece of rhetoric at the end, and it should be taken in that context, but I would hope that it will produce results. I may add that Mr McElwain gave his farewell at the last council meeting, but we're very pleased to see that the back, Joe, only temporarily. Thank you.
Provost, thanks very much for that. The community planning is certainly not the disaster that has been portrayed, nor is it the panacea. It's not meant to be either. What it's meant to be is where ideas come together, where agencies come together for the good of the community. And when you look at some of the partnerships that we have, for example, with the college and education, and as well as education, also we have the employment advice centre, the number of apprentices is directly related to a relationship with the college, for example. So there is some good work that's been undertaken. On the issue of poverty, we all know that poverty brings mortality at an earlier stage than it should. And we all know the main reason why we're facing the poverty levels that we are at the moment. And that's very much tied to the welfare system that we have. It's very much under attack. And that is something that has been accepted, I think, across the Chamber. The fact that the Conservative members were big enough to support a motion which criticised the universal credit, for example, bodes well for relationships within this Council. But it does mean that we still have that responsibility to ensure that the most vulnerable in our community are looked after. And when you hear stories of people going 8, 9, 10 weeks for any income whatsoever, then because of the benefit problems and the changeover, and particularly where you have disability issues, are horrendous. And we know that must be adversely affecting the poverty levels and the mortality levels within our communities. We need to get that issue addressed as quickly as possible. The current benefits changes have been an absolute disaster for those of us who believe in equality and responsibility, as well as respect for the individuals who are forced onto it to benefit. mostly through no fault of their own, particularly those who suffer disability, but not exclusively. So I think that, Provost, the issue is a complex one, but we cannot ignore the role that national and UK government have. Thankfully, we have the Scottish Welfare Fund, which has done a great deal to alleviate some of the immediate poverty, but it can't mitigate for the whole community and the whole welfare changes that have occurred. We know that. I think that the whole council knows that. But we do need to address the issues of benefit changes. And I would hope that that's something, a message that can go across party lines to the Treasury, and we can see a return to some form of more human approach. I mean, when you have the organisations, like international organisations, condemning the UK for the changes in the benefit system, then you really have a problem, and that has to be recognised and dealt with. Coming back to the issues of community planning, we have the IJB is part of that particular process. It's only part of the process. Health is far wider than just the IJB. We have a member who's well respected, and on this side of the chamber, I'm sure well respected in that side of the chamber as well, representing Falkirk Council on the health board. It may be that Councillor Black may wish to contribute to the discussion this morning with regards to the issues of the wider health board. Because there's changes, obviously, that have been implemented that people are perhaps unaware of. There's changes been implemented that perhaps people need to a greater grasp of. And it's the responsibility of all of us to ensure that happens, particularly those, obviously, that are given positions of responsibility.
Is it myself? Yes, just going back to Councillor Reid's point there, I totally concur with everything he said there. And going to the strategy plan, I think what's important, we really need to work together with all the other services and see what's actually happening in our communities. Councillors, as you know, deal with people, and people come to us with their concerns and their inquiries and things like that. And I'm impressed with the outcome you want. You do want strong, sustainable communities, individuals and communities that are resilient and empowered with a full range of support. But you need to see actually what is happening in the community. And with regard to leasing, what's actually happened there, there has been a lot of upset with our vulnerable communities, people like that who, and if I can say to you, one of the most important things is about elderly people, is even more important than good exercise, food, diet, is actually get out and about, engaging with each other and meeting people and having interest. That's high up there for health and well-being. And because what's happening in communities with our leasing, and quite a few of these groups have folded, as a matter of fact, and I am extremely disappointed at that. And I just feel we should have had more a flexible approach so that we are actually supporting the older people in our communities to take part, to engage, to empower themselves. Otherwise, what could maybe happen? They could be isolated and they could be loneliness, and that could impact on our other services, our health services, our doctors, our hospitals and things like that. So I really feel it's very, very important that we all work together and we see actually what is happening in all the different services, and we work together and try and find solutions. Thank you.
Thanks, Provost. I wasn't actually sure in what way David wanted me to actually respond, but in regard to inequalities, and the Health Board does have a health improvement plan which has got 6 priorities, and I can't remember them all offhand, but one of them is reducing inequalities, one of them is alcohol and drug, and one of them is like looking after children. So I can get some copies put in the lounge. But the anti-poverty strategy, again, that's part of
like reducing inequalities, promoting good health, etc. But we also like economic development. It's got a big part to play, because one of the biggest things in reducing inequalities is giving people opportunities to actually earn a living. So there's the council-wide, we've obviously got lots of strategies in place, but in regards to the health board, I wasn't sure actually what you were wanting me specifically to say anything on.
Councillor Alexander, just to clarify exactly. Thank you.
Yeah, I think the Councillor Black's touched on the areas I was looking for. Just the role of the health board, the direction policy-wise that it's taking. So that's really helpful.
I think also that we have, like, in the council, we have the minutes of we've got minutes of the health board meetings. We've also got minutes of the IGB, and I think it's quite good if folk do read them, because, for example, the last IGB meeting we had quite a long discussion about primary healthcare transformation, and there's a good article in that, Councillor Flynn, that you can actually sit and look at, what's been happening and the reasoning behind it, because over the last 10 years we've had a GP crisis really nationally, but it's just in the last year that we're actually starting to train more GPs, but there's still, because a third of the NHS staff are in their 50s, so obviously looking forward we have to have a succession plan, and we've not got that in place, but that's a national problem. But if you have a look at the old, the previous reports as they come, and if anything at all that anybody wants to find out more, ask me. I'll do my best to find out for them, and I can also try and get copies of reports and leave them in there. But the health board minutes and the IGB minutes are all in the volume of minutes, and I think, as I say, it's actually quite good. People are very busy, but you can catch a lot up just by looking through those.
It was just really to highlight back with the report. I think that much as what has been said this morning links back to what Councillor Colley was saying in her summary about, this is a strategic plan, and what's being highlighted is the joint working and the importance of yes, it does link back with what our council's priorities are and our plans and our sole plans and what we are trying to develop. But there's so many areas where people have highlighted the trust, or people have highlighted issues within housing. I know that some of the difficulties which some of the members of our older community of older people have been highlighted, but I think that it's also important that it's highlighted in all the impact on families and equalities for our younger people and for adverse childhood experiences, which we are seeing as well having such a huge impact on what will later come into the system in terms of healthcare, in terms of poverty, in terms of life chances. And where I agree with Councillor Reid in that many of us did grow up in very challenging circumstances and had our parents' aspirations, there's also a degree of recognition that sometimes, no matter how hard you work or how much your parents' aspirations are, sometimes it's good fortune, and that there are many in our communities who work very, very hard and through no fault of their own, whether that's their parents' aspirations or other circumstances, find themselves in a continuing loop of poverty. And we have a much greater challenge in all that we do to try to tackle those things. But I do think that there are very many positive things outlined in this report which reflect the need and the progress in partnership working, and that, happy that we will approve that and agree that at Council today. Going forward, I think that, as Councillor Colley said in her summary, the details are there. This is a strategy. This is a plan going forward. It's not the laying out of everything and all of those answers. And I think that in linking it back to the national priorities and seeing the progress that's been made, it's good that we're moving forward with that plan today.
Yeah, just a quick comment on Councillor Black's statement there. Thank you very much for it, Councillor Black. I wish I'd remembered that when I was lying in my bed in hospital for 20 days and nothing better to do but look at the minutes of the IGB and the Health Board. I would have known better than to have asked the question earlier. Thank you.
Very much. Okay, I think we've had a really good discussion on that item. Are we agreed? Thank you very much. That takes us to item 8, which is appointments. It's page 105 to 122 in your agenda. Mr. Moody, thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, Provost. This is a report which comes in 3 parts. It deals with 3 issues. Firstly, the licensing board. Secondly, some questions arising associated with the education executive. and thirdly, appointments to the Community Trust Board. So taking these one by one, firstly dealing with the Licensing Board. The suggestion which is put forward to you in the report is a pragmatic one, and it's that we temporarily reduce the size of the Licensing Board by 2, and that reflects the 2 vacancies which are currently there on the Licensing Board at the moment. The effect of reducing the size of the board will be to reduce the quorum from 5 to 4, and that will have helpful practical benefits for the 8 members of the board who are sitting at the moment. It is sometimes a pressure on those members to maintain a quorum of 5, particularly when there are longer meetings of the board, as sometimes can be the case, particularly when there are review hearings. So that's the suggestion in relation to the board. In relation to the Education Executive, these are issues which arise from discussion at a meeting of the Education Executive itself. And the first of these relates to the suggestion that we widen the membership of that particular committee to include a care-experienced young person. And that, I think, is in part to reflect the earlier decision of the Council to widen the remit of the committee to include the remit for social work for children's services, reporting to the Education Executive. And more broadly, it reflects, I think, a furtherance of the Council's duty as corporate parent. The suggestion within the report is that the appointment can be made on the recommendation of the Champions Board, and there are criteria for the person who can be appointed, which is aged up to 26, a care-experienced young person, and that the term of office would be the remainder of lifetime of the Council. Now, associated with that is the suggestion, again arising at the same meeting, that the title of the Committee of Education Executive doesn't necessarily best reflect the range of business which is currently before the body. So the suggestion which has been brought to you is Children and Young People Executive. It doesn't capture absolutely everything that the committee does, and in particular it doesn't necessarily reflect the fact that criminal justice is part of children's services. But I think it isn't easy to come up with a single title unless it's a very long title which captures everything, and that may also reflect, for instance, that community learning and development isn't mentioned in the title either. But it's a matter for Council to determine how they wish to name their own committees. The third issue relates to the Community Trust, and that itself comes in 2 parts. It's firstly to note the fact that appointments have been made following the end of the first term of office for 2 years by the SNP group, the Conservative group and the Labour group. Those are done by slate. But there's also a member of the board reserved for independent members of the Council, and until very recently that position was occupied by you, Provost. But as the report notes, you have recently stood down, and that leaves 3 members of the Council who are eligible to take up that position. If there was agreement among the independent members, it could have been dealt with that way. As the report notes, there wasn't agreement, and accordingly it falls to the Council to appoint a member to the board from among the independent members. And I should perhaps note in relation to the second matter as well, we've appended changed standing orders, which, if Council is content with the proposals in relation to the Education Executive, I would also ask you to approve those changes as well. I'm happy, Provost, to take any questions on any of these issues.
Okay. I think it's been simplified, and I think, Mr Moody, I think we'll just go through them just to simplify it one by one. We've taken the licensing board first then.
Provost. I'm happy to recognise the pragmatic approach. I understand that the licensing board members are working very, very well together and doing a fantastic piece of work around the licensing board at this moment in time, but that there is a strain there in relation to the numbers, so I'm happy to move the recommendation that the numbers be temporarily be reduced to 8, and thus enabling a smaller quorum and facilitate the business of the board.
I'll formally second.
My comments are really mostly to do with an item later in the agenda, but at this stage, seeing you've got me to my feet, Provost, I'll just say that I agree with everything the leader has just said.
Thank you, Provost. I agree with temporarily reducing the numbers on the licensing board, and I think the board is working exceptionally well. And I would agree with reducing its membership temporarily.
Anybody otherwise thinking of agreeing to the first item, which is the licensing board being reduced? Everybody agree? Thank you very much for that. Mr. Woody, next one, Aiken.
Happy to move the inclusion of a care experienced young person within the executive. I think the work that is being done in co-production with our young people, our cared for experienced young people, is absolutely fantastic, and we're starting to see some of the changes that will actually be of a great benefit to them being fed in through our closer to home strategy, and particularly within housing and a good number of other areas. I think they bring a richness to the committee, and the fact that they can be right at the heart of the committee and be part of that decision-making process, I think demonstrates our commitment as a corporate parent to looking after our care for young people. And I would also like to see a way of increasing the role of our young people who are already involved within the Education Committee executive to be able to participate in a greater way and actually be able to help tailor the delivery of services, and particularly within education and social work as we go forward.
Second, Provost.
Just to say it's a worthy move that we're happy to support.
Provost, happy to support item 2 as well.
Takes us. Everybody agreed to that then? Thank you very much. Item 3, which is agree the Education Executive be renamed the Children and Young People Executive. Councillor Meikle-John again.
Thank you, Provost. This is to reflect the changing nature of the work of the Executive, and the controversy may well be around a name, but the name reflects the broad aspect of what the committee now does, but also the broad nature of our young people, and it's not just those within education that are part of the subject matter of that particular committee. I know that Mr Moody looked at others that have brought together services such as this, and looked at how they've renamed their committees in order to reflect the work, and also aligns, this particular name aligns itself with the COSLA thematic board of children and young people. I think that shows the holistic nature of what we're trying to do, that's very cross-cutting, and that education is not the only aspect of looking after, supporting and developing our young people going forward, and I hope that that also reflects the partners that are actually at the decision-making table.
Provost.
Thank you, Provost. As a group, we do recognise the points that were made both by Mr Moody and by Cecil there, that the mere title Education Executive is no longer sufficient to reflect upon the wide range of subject matter that comes before that committee. However, not for 1 minute do I think, Provost, that there is a single member in this chamber that does not hold education and ourselves as the education provider by and large very dear to our hearts. I think it is not to the detriment of any other of the subjects that's covered, but I do feel that education, the name education, should remain in there to reflect how important every Prime Minister, every First Minister makes the claim how important education is. It's important to us here as well as individual members. We all recognise the value of bringing people out of poverty, that education is such an important factor in so doing. And I think this one is perhaps the first point in this proceedings that we've had this morning where there is just a genuine, I wouldn't say a disagreement, but perhaps a different emphasis. My group are very keen to see education remain in there, not by itself. The name that is suggested is that the committee, the Education Executive, be renamed the Education and Young Persons Executive. So it does have the catch-all that we need to cover the other subjects, but I think it is important that education is, at least gets a name check, and this is a view honestly held by members of my group. I would hope that perhaps the Leader of the Council would look at it again. I've heard that Mr Moody has looked out elsewhere and what other people do. You know, quite frankly, I'm not so sure that I'm interested in what other people call it. I think that education should remain at the heart of Falkirk Council, and that should be reflected in the name of the committee that deals with education, notwithstanding the fact, as I've said, that the other subjects that are covered are reflected by the addition of the name and young persons. Thank you.
Thank you. Before I bring anybody else in, and maybe go back to the Leader, Councillor Meiklejohn, in relation to which we've just heard what Councillor Nicholl's group think. Do you want maybe a time to reflect on this?
No, Provost.
Right.
To be honest, at the end of the day, I don't want us to be sitting here for an hour or so debating a name. It's far more important that we get on with the business of the day. The only comment I would make is that we're missing out some of the quite fundamental parts of children and young people. And I appreciate that it's probably language, but I'm not going to go into a great opposition to having education. If we can accommodate education, young and children and young people's executive, it is a bit lengthy. I understand that, but I think that would probably give a better reflection and maybe accommodate something that is from the Conservative group.
Could I just thank the Leader of the Council? Could I just thank the Leader of the Council? Well, if I've understood her correctly, she's agreeing that the name would be changed to education and, did you say young peoples or young persons?
Education, children and young people's.
Yeah, okay. It gets a bit lengthy, but yeah, I'm quite happy. I'll meet anybody halfway, Provost.
Hi, Provost. We're happy to support item 3 and change the name to Children and Young People Executive. I think it's more socially inclusive, shall we say, and we're happy to agree to that.
That takes us to the Trust Board appointment. Before we go into the details of that, can I say that we'd like to apologise to the Trust and Board members for the past few months, that for different reasons, and especially now that I'm sort of into the throes of the Provostship, that I've been unable to attend a lot of the meetings, and that's the reason for my resignation. It's a wonderful board, to be honest, do a wonderful work, but the fact is that when you don't turn up, you feel as though you're letting it decide down, and that was my reason for resignation. Okay then, Mr Moody.
Yes, Provost, the remaining piece of business is simply to call for nominations for the independent member of the board.
Councillor Bissett.
Hi, Provost. We would like to nominate Councillor McLuckie for this position to the Trust. Thank you.
Seconder there.
Happy to second, Provost.
Councillor Meikle-John.
I would wish to nominate the portfolio holder in Councillor Robert Spears for the position in the Trust.
Thank you. Is that a seconder?
Formally second.
Thank you. Anybody else want to come into a debate, or are we happy just to go to the vote? Happy to go to the vote? Okay.
Yes, thank you, Provost. There are two councillors nominated, Councillor McCluckie and Councillor Spears. I will just call through the roll and ask members to indicate which councillor they are voting for. Provost Buchanan.
Councillor McCluckie.
Deputy Provost Ritchie.
Councillor Spears.
Councillor Aitchison. Councillor Alexander. Councillor Balfour. Councillor Binney. Councillor Bissett. Councillor Black. Councillor Blackwood. Councillor Bowes. Councillor Coleman. Councillor Colley. Councillor Coombs. Councillor Flynn. Councillor Goldie. Councillor Grant. Councillor Harris. Councillor Hughes. Councillor Kerr. Councillor McCluckie. Councillor Meikle-John. Councillor Monroe. Councillor Murtagh. Councillor Nicholl. Councillor Nimmo. Councillor Patrick. Councillor Reid. And Councillor Spears. Provost, there are 17 votes for Councillor McCluckie, there are 11 votes for Councillor Spears, and Councillor McCluckie is duly appointed.
Next item on the agenda, execution of deeds, pages 123 to 126. Agreed? Yeah. Now, before we go...
You're too quick. I did speak to Mr Moody yesterday regarding an item on the agenda, and he was getting me more information on it.
Yes, thank you, Provost. I think the items in question are the heading Minute of Agreement in relation to Land at Pomont Community Centre and the Royal Hotel, or I think it was particularly the Land at Pomont Community Centre. And I can advise Councillor Nicholl that this is a Section 69 agreement under the Town and Country Planning Act. It's a planning contribution in relation to development at the site at the community centre.